Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
It's our history unit, which is always interesting to me. Our writers often find very interesting subjects to write about. This one, I didn't know anything about, so I was extra curious about what they found out. We're going to be talking about pet food. Most of you, not most of you, I don't know if I can say that in Taiwan. I think in America, though, most kids have at least one pet growing up. We're going to talk about what kibbles are. What's a kibble? We are going to explain that. And it's a 2-day unit, so get ready to learn a lot about pet food and how it came into being.
If you've ever had a cat or dog, you know what their food is like. It's either a bag of brown kibble or a tin of wet chopped up meat. It's hard to imagine pets consuming anything else, really. But this concept of pet food hasn't been around as long as we think. In fact, the idea of distinct food for the animals in our lives is relatively new. For most of human history, animals stayed outside and ate either raw meat or table scraps. After the Industrial Revolution, though, the expanding middle class wanted more civilized pets like cats and dogs to live indoors as companion animals. In 1860, American entrepreneur James Spratt devised the world's first commercial pet food, Spratt's Meat Fibrine Dog Cakes. Spratt first marketed his cakes to prosperous British gentlemen who could afford their expensive price. He advertised them as being the only choice for health-conscious pet owners, and soon the dog cakes were flying off the shelves in the U.S. too. The pet food industry continued to grow, with canned pet food becoming the popular choice in the early 1900s. However, for decades, many dog foods were made from ground horse meat. This resulted in tens of thousands of horses being slaughtered annually to feed the industry. The outrage this news generated among animal lovers, along with harsh rationing during World War II and stricter regulation after, led pet food makers to get creative. In the 1950s, the Ralston Purina Company created the first pet kibble using a special process. It had a long shelf life and could be packaged cheaply in bags or cardboard. Today, kibble-based pet food persists as one of the most popular options.
Okay, guys, let's take a look at the title first. The past, which is the history, and the present, that's current day of pet food. Notice, guys, that food is non-count. I'm noticing more and more people in Taiwan wanting to put S's on non-count nouns like bread, food, equipment, information. Be careful with that. We almost never put an S on food for native speakers, even though there are different types of food we're talking about. So be careful with that. Just as an example, you could also write this title as Pet Foods, *S, Pet Foods Past and Present, the History of Pet Food. There are different ways to write the title too. So just in case you were curious. Now, if you've ever had a cat or dog, you know what their food is like. Yeah, I've always felt kind of sorry for the cats and the dogs. It looked kind of gross what they were eating, but they like different food than we do, and we're going to find out what appeals to them pretty soon. So it could be either a bag of brown kibble or a tin of wet, chopped up meat. Gross. A kibble is a word that Tom and I were familiar with because of growing up in America. There was a food company, and they made something called Kibble and Bits. And it had a little dog chasing after this wagon that was filled with meat. It was kind of a cute commercial. I can still see it. And we ended up buying that for a puppy that we had for quite a while. So I think their advertisement was very successful in my family. So brown kibble, we'll explain more about kibble in a minute. A tin is one of our vocabulary words. Tin is a type of metal, yes, but it also means a metal container. We tend to use can more frequently in American English. The British love to say a tin of something. And our writer is British. We love him. So you'll either see a tin of something or a can of something, and it just means a metal container that has something inside. For example, I made tuna salad for myself last night, and I opened up a tin of tuna fish. You could open up a can of tuna fish. It's the same thing. And inside is that chopped meat. Now, for cats, or mostly for cats, I think, they have these tins of wet chopped up meat. In my family, we would call it gourmet cat food because those tins are quite expensive.
They're more expensive than the hard stuff, but I did want to mention that, yeah, we're familiar with the word kibble in the United States because of that brand of dog food. Although they called it kibbles and bits, they made it into a countable noun. Yeah. But here it's being used as a non-count noun, which refers to, I guess its original meaning means like a bunch of beans and seeds kind of mixed together, kibble. But if you're talking about pet food, then we do use the word kibble, at least in the UK. So it could be brown kibble or simply hard cat food or hard dog food, as we call it.
Or dry. Dry, we would say dry cat food too.
That's the word also that we use. And back to the word tin there, I think the full term is tin can. And it's interesting, in the UK they'll say tin, and in the US we tend to say can. Hey, would you like to open that can of tuna? I need to make some tuna fish sandwiches there. But in any case here, it's a can or a tin. You can use either word depending on where you are. And yes, you could have the soft cat food, which would be chopped up meat in the can or the tin, and you could have the dry food, which could also be referred to as kibble. But it's hard to imagine pets consuming anything else, really. Exactly. If you have a pet cat or a pet dog at home, what do you feed them? You feed them pet food. You go down to the pet store and buy cat food or dog food. We can't really imagine feeding them anything else.
Well, in my family, we did. We didn't start using store-bought cat food or pet food for a while. My mom was different. She believed that animals belonged outside. And so I never knew I was allergic to dogs and cats until I was much older. I had no idea. But our pets were outside. So a lot of times growing up, we would have steak for dinner. And my mom would, of course, give that the leftovers or the scraps, we call them scraps, we'd give that to our dog to eat. Oh, that made Maverick really happy. That was the name of our dog. He would rather have people food, as we called it, than, the kind you bought at the grocery store. He didn't really like that so much. I think we spoiled him. Anyway, yeah, the concept of pet food hasn't been around as long as we think. Even for me, growing up, we used people food for quite a while. Less so with cats than the dogs. So, in fact, it says the idea of distinct food or food only used for one thing or for animals in our lives is relatively new. We're going to be talking about the history of pet food. So for most of human history, animals stayed outside. That was what happened in my house, and ate either raw meat or table scraps. Animals can eat raw meat. They have better digestive systems than people. They can eat things that would hurt people to eat, like bone. Sometimes chopped up bone will go into their bodies and they can survive that sort of thing. But table scraps, as I said, you can also say leftovers from dinner or lunch or something.
Yeah, we had maybe pieces of fat or things like that from our steaks or whatever.
They love that.
And also with Fred, our dog Fred, we used to have this little game was he could, of course, catch the food in midair, right? If you threw it at him, he could catch it.
Like a Frisbee.
Like a Frisbee, right. And, of course, we tried to throw it at him harder and harder to see if he could catch it. And then sometimes, of course, he was just too slow and couldn't catch it. But we weren't mean to him or anything. We weren't trying to heard him. We're just testing his reaction time there. But he was actually pretty fast there. He could catch those things in midair, and it was pretty cool. But the point here is that animals mostly stayed outside and either ate raw meat or table scraps. We didn't really have any special food for them. And after the Industrial Revolution, though, the expanding middle class wanted more civilized pets like cats and dogs to live indoors as companion animals. So, of course, we've got the Industrial Revolution, which, of course, changed a lot of things. A revolution does refer to a big change. It could be a national revolution like the French Revolution or the Mexican Revolution, the American Revolution, etc. But this is the Industrial Revolution when people gradually stopped working on the farm and started working in factories.
Yeah, we had factories that were suddenly very popular. They had invented the use of steam engines, and so it changed life forever. So the middle class wanted more civilized pets. Civilized just means somebody or something like an animal that's able to, live in a more sophisticated place. If you're civilized, you probably have good manners. Animals that are uncivilized would be things like wolves, bears. You wouldn't invite them into your home. My mom never felt like that we needed to invite a dog into the house. That's changed with my brothers and sisters. Now that they have families, they have those really small dogs that live in the house. But I would probably keep my pets outside if I had a backyard.
Well, you're from Arizona,
yes,
not
we had
from
yards.
Iowa. So, it would have been inhumane to make our dogs and cats stay outside in the middle of January.
No, I know what you're saying. Well, in the winter, but in Arizona, it's very hot. So my mother bought little baby swimming pools for the dogs.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, those golden retrievers, I guess, really like to swim. But most animals won't go in the water unless you throw them in.
We had a dog that loved water. He was a hunting dog, an Irish Springer Spaniel, and they live in water. So, he was very happy to have his swimming pool. We're going to talk more about this particular topic, guys. But right now, we're going to listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜，相信大家都有养宠物的这种经验。我们今天要来谈谈看这种宠物食品，这种所谓的 kibble， 这种粗磨饲料、干饲料，它的历史哦。好，我们来看一下，在第一段当中，第一段我们要特别注意一下第4句的地方。第4句他说啦，他说宠物食品这种概念呢，其实没有我们想象的那么久。就像我们平常以前，我刚刚说我们小时候养狗，大概就是丢一些剩菜剩饭。好，我们这一句看到 This concept of pet food hasn't been around， 先特别注意一下它的动词。Something has been around 不是在四周哦，而是存在的意思。那到底这样子的食物存在了多久呢？好，我们在第2段当中啊，其实一开始就说了，大部分的这个人类的历史当中，其实动物都是在户外的。那户外动物如果是吃生肉啊，或者是我们刚刚说的剩菜剩饭 table scraps， 通常是很稀疏平常的事。可是重点是在这个工业革命之后呢，有一些中产阶级，他们希望猫跟狗可以更为所谓的开化，更为文明，所以后来才发展出所谓的 kibble 这种粗磨饲料。我们在第2段，在第1句的地方，我们把一个片语抓出来，连接词片语 either or， either raw meat or table scraps。 我们同样回到第1段的地方，第2句也出现了非 A 则 B， 不是 A 就是 B， either A or B 这个连接词。好，同样在我们第2段第2句的地方，它有一点长，最后面倒数第3个字的 as 可以把它圈起来，在这里是介系词，如同好像以及表示身份的意思。这个身份就是 companion animals， 这个动物是要跟我作伴的哦，而且是要 live indoors， 住在室内的，所以他们希望呢，这些宠物能够 more civilized， 更为文明。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, let's continue to talk about pet food. Cat food, dog food, etc. We're mainly talking about cats and dogs here. Those are the most common kinds of pets that people have. And we were talking about the fact that in the past, people usually fed their pets food outside. They would eat raw meat. Maybe they'd kill their own rats and stuff like that. And also, they would eat table scraps, food that we're not going to eat, leftovers, basically. But we had a change there in the Industrial Revolution, of course. People wanted to have more civilized pets, like cats and dogs. They wanted them to stay indoors and be companion animals. And in the year 1860, just before the American Civil War started, American entrepreneur James Spratt devised the world's first commercial pet food called Spratt's Meat Fabrine Dog Cakes. Okay.
Fabrine or Fabrine?
Fabrine, I guess. I've never seen that word myself before, and it was really difficult to look it up on the internet. So don't worry too much about that word. It's not used in modern usage too much. But that was the name of his product there. It was a kind of food for dogs, dog cakes. So I'm imagining they were kind of hard and chewy for dogs.
Yeah, even if you give your dog what we call treats at home, what they do is they help their teeth. They clean their teeth. They think they're delicious. We would look at it and go, oh my gosh, that looks terrible. But yeah. Animals, again, eat differently than people do. So Spratt, the inventor, he marketed his cakes to prosperous British gentlemen who could afford their expensive price. Yeah, that's what they often do. If you have a product and it's expensive, you're not going to waste time advertising it to the middle class or to the poor lower classes. They can't afford it. They don't have enough money. So if you're prosperous, you have quite a bit of money. Maybe you earned it yourself. You've been successful in your career. Or maybe someone in your family died and left you their wealth, which is nice. So Spratt advertised them as being the only choice for health-conscious pet owners. And soon the dog cakes were flying off the shelves. This is a phrase we use to say something is selling very quickly. It's very, very popular. Wow, that new pair of shoes that just came out, they're selling like hotcakes. They're doing really, really well. Now, of course, that's the way that these pet food companies get us to buy their expensive pet food. They tell us that if we love our pets, we want to give them the very best.
Exactly, and of course they're manufactured with the pet's nutritional needs in mind. So if you feed them anything else, you could be hurting them. So indeed, buy our product and guarantee that your cat or your dog will get the best food and will live a really, really long time. So yes, when this food came out, he advertised them quite well. And of course, they sold quite well. They flew off the shelves. They sold like hotcakes, as you said. Now, here in the next paragraph, it says, the pet food industry continued to grow, with canned pet food becoming the popular choice in the early 1900s. So, yes, that was in the early 1900s, before the Titanic sank and before World War I, of course. People were preferring to have canned pet food that was in cans or tins, as opposed to bags of hard food.
Right, so you'll never guess what was inside. They were actually using ground horse meat. If meat is ground, they just take a large piece of meat and it's separated to very small pieces. We use ground beef to make hamburgers, I should say. But in Taiwan, I've also seen a lot of ground pork, ground chicken. Sometimes it's easier to make patties or those round things that we put in sandwiches and on buns, as we call them. Well, people wanted to buy this ground horse meat for their dogs, and so this resulted in tens of thousands of horses being slaughtered annually to feed the industry. That's what happens when something gets popular. Sometimes there's an overuse of that one thing. So slaughter just means the killing of animals for food. We also use this word, though, sometimes, guys, when there is an awful awful event that happens where a lot of people are killed at the same time. They were slaughtered. We might see this in a newspaper article or on the news. Maybe there was a bomb that was exploded by a terrorist trying to kill people, or maybe someone went into a place and shot 50 people, killed them all. We would use that word slaughtered, but typically it's a word that we use to talk about killing animals for food. Pigs are slaughtered, cows are slaughtered for beef, things like that. So people were pretty upset when they learned that their beloved horses were being killed.
Exactly. Now, the next sentence is a little tricky here, so pay special attention. It says, the outrage this news generated among animal lovers, along with harsh rationing during World War II and stricter regulation after, led pet food makers to get creative. Now, the basic sentence here is, the outrage led pet food makers to get creative. Okay, so the outrage, of course, refers to the anger that people felt because all those horses were being slaughtered. Who doesn't love horses? They're just such majestic creatures. You can ride on them. They're beautiful. How could you possibly kill horses in order to feed cats and dogs? So people were very angry about that. And of course, when someone is angry, we have outrage. So this caused outrage among animal lovers. And then that outrage, with the harsh rationing during World War II and stricter regulation after, well, those three things led pet food makers to get creative. So the first thing is the outrage. Secondly, we've got rationing during World War II, and then we've got regulation. Now, rationing is when you basically try to control how much of something is used. So during World War II, of course, they had to ration all sorts of things so that the American soldiers could go off and fight the Germans and the Japanese. So people living in the United States had to limit the amount of things that they were using, like butter and milk and other things.
Yeah, things that usually made your food taste better. They were limited. Now, there was also stricter regulations that followed. Regulation can be non-count and countable. Regulations just refer to rules that are made by usually a government and that people have to follow. Usually, if you aren't following regulations, you aren't put in jail for that, but you might be fined for it. We have regulations in Taiwan. We did where you had to wear a face mask. That's a regulation. That's not a law that you'll be put in jail for. So there were stricter regulations after that, although some cultures just like horse meat, like the French. They love horse meat still. So this led pet food makers to think more creatively. They had to come up with something else. And so in the 1950s, the Ralston Purina Company, which still exists today, they created the first pet kibble using a special process. So they kind of put things together like seeds and other grains that they could use. And what ended up happening is this kibble had a long shelf life. It would last forever. It didn't get old, so you'd have to throw it away. And they could package it cheaply in bags or cardboard. Even today, it's sold in bags and those boxes that are made of cardboard.
And today, kibble-based pet food persists. It continues as one of the most popular options or choices. And, of course, I can't help but doing this, but Purina makes the famous Purina dog chow and Purina cat chow. You might see those brands in stores here in Taiwan. Who knows? Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Here comes our Chinese teacher.
所以在1860年代的时候啊，美国企业家 James Spread 他就先发明了一种 dog cakes， 就是所谓的商业的宠物食品。那么这种肉饼呢，其实当时还蛮受欢迎的耶，因为它的行销方法很特别。那么 Spread 呢，它首先是把这个 dog cakes 行销给付得起这种昂贵价钱的英国的富裕的绅士，然后又刊登广告说他们是重视健康的宠物主人唯一的选择。所以狗饼当时一开始在推出，这是所谓的第一代的宠物食品，卖的就非常好。我们同样在第二段这个地方，请注意一下第4句，这里有一个限定用法的关系子句哦。 哦。当然，原本句子的主词 spread 后面加的动词叫做 marketed。Market 当动词就有行销的意思，行销给谁呢？先行词出现 prosperous British gentlemen， 这些很有钱的富裕的英国的绅士，限定用法则从 who 到句尾的地方，这些绅士是可以 afford 负担得起昂贵价格的这些富裕的英国绅士。好，第5句我们来看到后面呢，动词出现叫做 advertise，广告，广告后面的 them 这里的代名词特别注意，指的是它的狗食哦 dog cakes， 而后面的 as 还是介系词，就是加身份，身为是什么什么，所以呢基本上 spread 是把它的 dog cakes 做广告打广告，说 as 是唯一的宠物主人的选择。好，那么接下来呢，宠物食品就一直不断持续成长啦。后来呢，到了差不多1900年，也就是20世纪初期的时候啊，很多人呢都一直在买这个宠物食品。不过因为好几十年以来啊，这些狗粮都是用磨碎的马肉制成的，所以一定要杀很多马才能够供给这样产业的需求。当然这会有一些负面的影响，因为这个消息呢，在动物爱好者当中就引起很多的愤慨。然后当时在20世纪中呢，又发生了第2次世界大战，就食物呢、水啊、电啊都有严格的配给，之后还有更严格的规定，让宠物的食品制造商呢，又把他们原本这个所谓 dog cakes 这一类第一代的宠物食品呢，做了一些变形。我们在最后一段请看一下第4句的地方，第4句这里比较特别哦，因为它的主词其实有3个，第一个是 the outrage 愤怒，后面带了一个省略关带的关系子句，从 this 到逗点 lovers 这边省略的是 that 或者是 which。 第2个主词呢，则由 along with 逗点之后这个连接词或者是所谓的介系词连同 harsh rationing 严格的分配。好，第3个主词是在 and 之后 stricter regulation 更严格的规定。好，真正的动词才出现，逗点之后的 led 导致了 pet food marketers to get creative， 那么这些 pet food makers 呢就变得比较有创意啦，所以就用一种 special process 很特别的一种制成，才产生了今天我们看到的 kibble 这些所谓的所谓的干的粗磨饲料。当然粗磨饲料呢到现在呢一直都是最受欢迎的选择，不过我们明天还要针对这个粗磨饲料还有更多的讨论哦。明天见，我是安娜，拜拜。
That's it for today, guys. We have one more day to talk about the past and present of pet food, what we're using today. I'm going to talk about what animals like to eat as opposed to people. We like completely different things. We're going to find out what those things are. So stay tuned for our next program. But right now, we got to say goodbye. For English Digest, I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom. Goodbye.
See ya.